Kia ora tātou. Welcome back, everybody. We now move on to number 9 of our order paper, and that's around the adoption of our annual report 2021-22. And I'll invite our CFO, Cameron Mackay, up, and Debbie, our Auditor Director. So, welcome.
Kia ora tātou, everybody, and good afternoon to you, Mr Mayor, and elected members. With me today, we have Debbie, who's our Audit Director from Audit New Zealand, so here to answer any questions in regard to the audit process. I thought it could be worthwhile just to give a bit of a overview of the annual report and the process to get us here today, particularly because we have some new elected members that weren't here part of the previous financial year. So it's just worthwhile for me to give that bit of an overview. For existing elected members, they received a fourth quarter report back in August, basically giving an overview of how we had performed financially and non-financially for the year. And we did that then because that meant we had some timely relevance to the year that had just finished. What normally happens at a similar time is we're going through our independent audit from Audit New Zealand, who basically ensures that our document and what we say in our annual report gives a true and fair reflection based on data that we have. Typically, we would have the audit had the audit completed by September and adopted at that point in time. Now, many of you will be aware that there has been some shortages of staff, in particular audit staff throughout New Zealand. And so because of that, the Office of Auditor General a year or two back extended the statutory deadline for councils to adopt annual reports to 31st of December. That, I think, ceases this year, and as a result of the reasons that applied then, they still apply today, and that is why we are here in December adopting the annual report. For those who were here in August, the result of the annual report and the audit process hasn't resulted in any material major changes from what was reported back in August, which is pleasing because it means that our processes are working to provide accurate information. But I do want to highlight that this document here is the accountability document to hit home how we did for the year against what we said we would do in the long-term plan and annual budget. So that's the whole reason why we go through this annual report and why it gets audited by an independent auditor. Happy to pass over to Debbie to talk a bit about the audit process and any questions.
Kia ora tātou. Well, it is my pleasure to be here today and to be in a position to issue an unmodified audit opinion over the financial statements of Council. And we do have a qualified opinion over some certain performance measures. But I would just like to first of all acknowledge the council staff, and particularly Cameron and Matt and everybody for the significant amount of work. There's a lot of effort that goes into an annual report. It's a very long document, probably a lot longer than you'd see necessarily in a commercial environment, and that's because there is a lot of legislation behind it. There's regulations that council also has to comply with. So as Cameron said, the audit is a lot later than we would usually like to have it. Basically my whole team ended up in Wellington to assist with the central government audit because their statutory deadline didn't move, so they still had to be adopted by 30 September. So the annual report is the first year reporting back against the 2021 to 31 LTPs. So it's the accountability loop. Basically, you set out what you're going to do in your long-term plan, and this is the reporting back to the community about how you did. So it covers both the financial statements and the non-financial. So the non-financial is, we term statement of service performance, and it really sets out in each activity what council plans to do. And so you've got your targets and then what you actually did, and we provide an audit opinion over that as well. So as I said before, we're pleased to be in a position to issue an unmodified opinion over the financial statements. So that means that we're satisfied that the financial statements present fairly in all material aspects the council and group's financial position as at 30 June 2022, and the results of the operations and cash flows for the year ended on that date. We also have a qualified opinion over the non-financials, but it's only over certain aspects, and these are the same aspects that we've had the qualification in 2020 and 21, and that is around the Three Waters complaints and the response times. Council has been aware of this and did make a decision that they were seeking guidance from DIA before amending the systems. We've also got a couple of other, what we call emphasis of matter within the, within the audit opinion, and that is just to highlight items that you've already disclosed in your annual report that we think are significant. So one is around the Three Waters, let me just find, the Government's Three Water Reform Program. And so that's on note 31 of the annual report. Council clearly sets out that the government introduced legislation to establish the 4 entities for water services, and that once the legislation receives assent, that will get transferred over. So that's just a note. Those assets haven't been transferred over, or there hasn't been any adjustments in the accounts for that. The other emphasis of matter that we have is around the inherent uncertainties in the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions. So council has, was page 104 of the financial statements, I'm not too sure in the pack which the page is, but has included a measure against greenhouse gas emissions. Council has also put a note that there are some inherent uncertainties around the scientific knowledge and methodologies to determine greenhouse gas emissions, and so we're just also making a note of that. Apart from that, very few changes. We don't have any unadjusted errors from council. We've got some group very minor material changes that didn't get put through into some of council's CCOs, but yeah, no significant changes to the annual report from what you would have seen, and no unadjusted errors. So I'm happy to take any questions if anyone would like to ask any questions.
Great, thank you, Cameron. Thanks, Debbie. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the thoroughness of your report. It's greatly appreciated. I do have a number of questions, just given the length of it, if you don't mind humouring me. If we can start on page 61 of our agenda, we see under capital expenditure there's a table. Both columns in this table say actual 2020/21. I was wondering if I've misread that or if that's just a typo.
To you, Councillor Wood, I just have to clarify on that one. I would assume that one of them would be 2021/22 and comparing to the 2020/21 year. So that would that appears to be a typo from looking at it.
No trouble, that's what I would have thought. If we can go to page 192, we have a line item here under expenses called direction setting. And if we look at the pages leading up to that, all it says under direction setting is, or just outlines our 5 goals. I imagine it didn't cost us $7.2 million to write those 5 goals, so I imagine it must encompass a fair bit more than just that. Is direction setting just any information we request in the chamber, any report we request? Is that the line item it's put under, or what is it?
My understanding that direction setting covers council's strategy and policy activities. So strategic planning and so forth all come through that direction setting activity. So anything to do with long-term planning, anything to do with policies and decisions through there comes through direction setting.
All right, and I guess a follow-up to that, the note attached to it says that it was higher than budget because of major private plan change work. It's around, goodness, I did have the figure, $1.9 million over budget, so that's all allocated to private plan change work above what we budgeted for.
Through you, Mr Mayor, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. So there was a lot of expenses during the course of that financial year for processing the Kia Rail notice of requirement, so that appears on our books, but we also then invoice that.
Awesome, thank you. If we move on to page 200, there is a note regarding the airport, and my understanding is this is a draft report, so there may still be some scope to change it, that says the council has accepted, at the bottom of the airport note, it says the council has accepted that in the immediate future P&L will not be able to pay dividends. My understanding of, and this was the prior council, my understanding is, given we've seen their financial reports and they've made a net profit after tax, they are able to pay a dividend. We've chosen not to request a dividend from them. So in, I guess, the spirit of accuracy, do you have an opinion on whether we amend that? Could amend that?
I believe that statement applies to a general direction that council was taking at the time, where the airport was reinvesting any surplus it might have into its capital investment program. The new council, since this was drafted, has indicated through its statement of expectations to have a discussion with the airport about future dividends, which would then mean that this statement would be altered through this financial year if that decision was changed at that point.
All right, thank you. And my final question is on page 227, and it regards the Chief Executive. I see here that in 21, we paid $380,246 to the Chief Executive. In this period, or the prior Chief Executive, in this period we paid $526,315, $96,660 of that was a severance payment above and beyond contractual entitlements. However, even if we take that off, that means the executive would have received $429,000 of contractual entitlements above and beyond what they were paid in 21. I was just wondering what those contractual entitlements were that led to such a significantly higher figure, $160,000 above the previous year.
So those contractual entitlements would be things such as annual leave owing to the former chief executive at the time of leaving the organisation, and anything that was written into the contract like that you would get at a standard end of contract. Wayne may have other things to add to that, but that's my understanding. It's just the things like annual leave liabilities and that sort of stuff gets paid out to a person when they leave, and then anything over top is deemed severance.
No, I understand that. I just thought $160,000 seemed like a remarkable amount of annual leave. But anyway, I appreciate your response and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Cameron. I've got a few questions. Just starting at page 55. Sorry. I haven't got a very good system here, sorry. No, it doesn't work on here. Okay, sorry. Thank you. On page 55, and the same is also on page 320, which is in attachment 2, it's the year in review summary. At the bottom of the first column on the left, It talks about the increase in the valuations, and then it says that meant we had to make tough decisions in the annual budget for this coming year to reduce the impact on our ratepayers. And then it talks about during the 2022 calendar year, we have started to now see these high property values beginning to fall. Now, the reason I've raised this is there is a misconception that out in the community that their valuation going up is what means that their rates go up. And then that having happened, if their valuation goes down, they feel, I mean, I've heard feedback from people who feel aggrieved that, you know, now they're paying this high amount of rates and their valuation's gone down. They assume that that should mean that the amount of rates they pay goes down, because there's a misunderstanding about how valuations impact on rates. And I believe that the way that is worded actually feeds into the incorrect understanding that people have. So I don't think it's helpful for us to write it in that way. If I realise this is the Mayor and Chief Executive's year in review, so that's, but if we are looking to perhaps amend that, can that be amended? Would that be considered a minor edit under the Chief Executive's delegation, or would we need to give direction to that today?
I'm not looking at changing it.
So what, the answer to that question is that it can't be changed, that it won't be changed?
It can be changed if you direct me to, yeah.
Okay.
But you're asking me whether I'll change it, or my opinion on it, and I said no.
No, it's a process question, really.
Yeah, okay, it was a process question. I suppose you'll have to give us some direction because it is quite open. And I'll take some advice from officers on that as well.
Through the Mayor, I would consider any change such as that would be a minor edit.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And there are a few other, Councillor Wood identified one area where the date was wrong, and there are a few other areas. So what's the process? Do we just feed that through following the meeting? I'm sure we don't want to waste meeting time on.
Yep, I'm happy for that, and we can analyse those.
Yeah, Councillor, just send them through to
Yeah,
Cameron
that's fine.
and go from there.
That's fine.
So I'd also have a question on page 181 of the report. Sorry, can I just keep using this for a moment? So this is also in note 8. Oh, it's 227 of our agenda, sorry. So just in terms of the remuneration for the executive leadership team, in 2021 it was 2.1 million and in 2022 2.4 million. It's about a 15% increase, yet there is one less person, so it's gone from 8 people to 7 people, but still had a 15% increase. And I'm just wondering if there is any explanation that we could be provided to give some context to why that's increased to such a level.
I don't have the details in front of me as to what makes all of that up, but what I can say is in the 2022 figure, it will include within there any severance payments made to executive team members, such as the outgoing chief executive as outlined above. So they're a one-off. That's a one-off payment.
Yep. Okay. I'll just leave it there, Mr. Mayor. I think I've got another question, but if I find it, I'll come back in. Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couple questions. More about the words and kind of the way things are interpreted, I suppose, and less about the actual numbers. But is there any standards or guidance around kind of how interpretable these should be to members of the general public?
Yes, the public should be able to pick up the document and be able to understand how we have performed during the year and what our achievements and challenges might have been. Certainly, through the audit process, our auditors also look at the words that are written as well as the financials to make sure that there's a coherency between the two. There is also the summary annual report, which is probably the document that the majority of the public, if they were choosing to read this, would be more reader-friendly, given it's a much more concise document. So there are a few things that we do to try and do that.
Thank you. So are there standards around that, or is it more of a professional judgment and kind of built-up tradition of how we've done things?
There isn't a particular standard as such. We do utilise our own communication team to help us with wording and how we word things in the document.
Thank you. If I can ask a specific example of that, it's page 60 on the papers. Looks like page 13, perhaps on the full report, page 60 on the agenda. There's a circle graph on the left-hand side there that refers to employee and elected representatives' benefit expenses. I guess I'm drawing your attention to that as an example of something that seems to be quite complexly worded and not immediately apparent to people what we're actually talking about there.
Okay, so what that is talking about is basically the expenses that we've incurred in relation to remuneration and elected member remuneration. So it's a combined of staff and elected member remuneration in that piece of the pie.
Cool, thanks for clarifying that. The second area of questioning I had is kind of around, I guess, how we relate the annual report back to the long-term plan and annual budgets, and there's some commentary around that in your presentations. I found the chart on the right-hand side of page 60/13, that same page, to be quite helpful as a summary that's a bit similar to the summary that we have in our long-term plan around the different areas of expenditures. I saw that particular chart hadn't made its way into the summary document, though, and thinking again about the members of the general public that probably do look at just the consultation document and just the summary here. Was there consideration around including that particular graphic in the summary as well to make it more accessible to the community?
I don't have an answer to that question, but because it is in the annual report, anything that's in the annual report can also be conveyed through the summary document. So it's not to say that it can't be.
Thank you. Would picking that up be classed as a minor edit, or would that need to be directed so that we could see that come through to the summary?
It's probably getting to what I would call the tightrope of whether that's minor or not, because we'd have to see in the summary where it might fit to also ensure that the story stays cohesive with whatever else is around it. So it's probably a little bit more than a minor edit to be, if I'm just thinking about that on the spot.
Yeah, that's fine. Happy to put some direction to the meeting to see where we might get on that then. Thank you for those responses.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following up part of Councillor Barrett's question, and Cam, in your presentation, you said this was our accountability document. So I just wanted to seek, and you've covered this in the report as to what's going to happen with the report, but how do we communicate this meaningfully to our community if you compare that to the amount of effort that goes into seeking their input at long-term plan or at annual budget? How would that happen that would be proportionate for our accountability document?
I'll have a crack, but I might need Donna to help me on this one. Basically, what happens post-adoption is this becomes publicly available on our website and publications available, I suspect, at various sites, for example, for the summary. I would envision that we would be able to put something up on our social media sites to say that it has been adopted, and direct people to the various documents that we have for this accountability document. But Donna might have more that she wants to add from a comms perspective.
Through the chair, we would be putting out a media advisory to let the public know that it's there. Cam's right, it would be on the website, but we would also be putting links in any other media that was going out around any of the projects that are in the annual report. We would be putting links back into the summary and onto the website so that every time something goes out from us, it will link back into the annual report so people can close that loop.
Thank you, Donna, and thanks, Cam. I suppose to follow on, actually, no, I'll save it for comment. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor, I should have taken myself out of the queue. Thank you.
Cam, just on, I think it was Councillor Barrett's comments around page 40, I think. No, 60, which has got the operating expenditure. We've got elected members and everybody else all lumped in together, yet we know the slither for elected members is quite tiny compared to the rest of the organisation. In past annual reports, I'm sure we've separated that out.
I'm not 100% sure of how it's been presented in past annual reports. We can look into that.
Could you? Because it does, and no disrespect to the people that work here full time, but it does look like we're all here all the time and all getting paid full time, and clearly that is not happening. So I just wonder if there is an opportunity to put the slither, which will be just a slither for elected members in a different colour, and then the rest of the organisation has its colour.
Yeah, we can look into that, yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions there are none? Great. Okay, look, thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Cam. A lot of work goes into that, so I appreciate your wider team's collective effort there. So, councillors, we've got the adoption of the annual report 2021-22. The council resolves that the annual report 2021-22 and summary annual report 21-22 be adopted. That council note that assuming audit clearance is given, an auditor's opinion from Audit New Zealand will be expected to be received following the recommendation adoption by council on this day, 14th of December 2022, and council signing of the reports. That council delegate authority to the Chief Executive to make minor edits to the annual report 2021-22 and summary annual report 21-22. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you.
Or the additional motion, sorry. So we'll just take this one first.
All right, and we've got an amendment from Councillor, sorry.
It could be taken, it could be taken as a separate motion. We'll do that first, and then we'll do that.
It's actually a separate motion. So that the OPEX and CAPEX by activity charts on page 13, is that page 13 and 15 of the annual report, be excluded in the summary of the report. That's moved, be included, sorry. I couldn't read your writing, sorry. In the summary
Should have been
of
a
the
doctor.
report. It's a major, that one. And that's moved by Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Naylor. We'll do that first. So, Councillor, while that's getting typed up, I'll ask you to speak to that. Yes. But before you go there, I'll just ask the CE to speak.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just sort of reflecting on those the questions that were asked around the table. I consider them all to be minor edits, and in actual fact, moving that graph to the summary report would be a minor change.
I'll withdraw in that case.
Okay, that makes life a bit easier. Thank you. Appreciate everybody's focus on that. Okay, we'll go to any comments. Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First, thank you to the officers for the report and to our comms team, I'm sure have been working hard on putting the documents together. And I do want to comment on the continuing improvement in the way that we present this information. I think we've seen huge strides over the last few years to actually present the information in a way that is readable and makes sense and is actually useful. So my concern is that if we put out a media release saying Council adopted its annual report, nobody will be interested in that. The value of the annual report is exactly what the officer said in her comment, is that it closes the loop on the consultation process that we invited our community into, that annual budget process where we debated all of those things, the decision that we made, and then the work that we did. The value of the annual report is in finishing that story, and that's the story I really want to encourage us to tell as the council, as an organisation, when we put this report out through our media release, through our social media. It's useful for people to know if we did the things that we said we were going to do. It's useful as it feeds into the next year's debate. When we have a report that says we did 86% of our capital programme, that's useful for people to know. And that gets lost if it's yet another report that council has adopted. This is a bit more than that, and I'd hope that's reflected in our commentary on it. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to start by seconding what Councillor Bowen said. This is a remarkably thorough report and certainly provides a good loop to connect in from our annual or our long-term planning. The thing I would say about this is no amount of marketing budget could make the average person in our city read this report. We could give you tens of millions of dollars. I think it would be remarkable if we had a good whack of the city reading this. That's not, in my eyes, what this is for. Everyone has their patch. Everyone has their item that they're particularly interested in. This gives our community a place to go where they can say, I am passionate about X, Y or Z. What's the council doing on it, so they can see if we are or aren't achieving at the level that we set out to do. And I think that's really great to have this document publicly accessible. I think the idea, and I agree we should do some promotion of it so people know that it does exist, but the idea that we're going to get people to read it's probably not awfully likely. I do want to pick up on, I sort of asked throughout my questioning, but I wanted to pick up, and I do hesitate saying this because I know there are a variety of views around the chamber, but the idea that Penal cannot pay a dividend, I think is just factually not true. They could. We have chosen to ask them to reinvest that money into their capital expenditure, and that's a perfectly valid thing for us to do. I'm not opposing whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying factually that is what we are doing here. They have made a net profit. They could pay a dividend if we asked them to. And so I feel that it's important that's reflected in there. Otherwise, we're perpetuating this idea that they just can't do it, which is not technically the case, certainly in my opinion. The other thing I'd like to flag is just the explanation of large line items. I think particularly when it comes to ones that are in the 5 million plus, it would be really good if there was some clear explanation of what it is that we've allocated into that, because a lot of this language we're using for those people who come out from outside of this organisation may not know what we're actually spending the money on and may not have anywhere to go to ask those questions. So things like goodness, whatever it was I was talking about, the decision-making money that was, $7 million, I think it would be helpful for people and for us to understand what has actually been allocated into that line item, which I realise creates a lot more work, but if we put the barrier high and said anything over 5 million, it'd be good to know what exactly that line item encompasses. I would find that really useful in reports going forward. But commend the staff on their thoroughness. Very impressive report, thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I think it's a great benchmarking opportunity for our community to see what we're doing.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. This is an incredibly full and thorough report, and it just acknowledges the work that's gone into it. As others have said, yes, hard to know who's actually really going to read those, but in particular the executive summary, I think it's important that we get that right for those who do choose to read it. And certainly it's our accountability to our community, so we do need to get it right. In the large part, this should be no news to those of us who have sat around the table over the last year. And but there are some items that are news to me and probably other elected members, because those are disclosed, and I refer specifically to the remuneration of staff, as that sits under the CE's delegation. It is only at this time where that's reported in the annual report that actually that's disclosed to even us as elected members. So for me, in reading through that, I must admit I did get a bit of a surprise to see, as is outlined on the bottom of page 228, that compared to a year ago, we've got 17 staff members in the over 160k bracket as opposed to 11. And the increase of 15% of the executive leadership team, even though that's reduced a number from 8 to 7, even when you take those severance amounts out, is still quite, when you average that out, that's still around 300k. And I note the sensitivity that people are in the room that perhaps this affects. But I did want to make a comment about that in terms of my level of discomfort, just given the context of that, is that we have a budget that is incredibly challenging, and we've been communicated by officers the challenge in terms of delivering on the work of the annual budget and the impact that that has on staff, workloads, holding vacancies in some instances, and the big picture of that doesn't sit well with me if we're allocating an additional remuneration each year in our budget. I, as an elected member, want to have some assurance that that is allocated in a way that pays people fairly across the board. And I have a level of discomfort if it seems to me that those at the upper end of the scale or the salary remuneration appear to be getting more of an increase than those at the bottom end of the scale. That's why I asked the question, to try and understand if there was some context. Clearly, there's some severance payments there that have escalated also of $178,000 in the last year, which is a lot more than last year. I've expressed before, colleagues know that this does not sit well with me. This is ratepayers' money. We need to be really mindful about the way that we use all of ratepayers' money. So I just wanted to note those things. I'm a little bit unclear at this point what the best way to communicate that value or the principles, if we came to a collective view, what the most appropriate way to convey that. Because obviously, you know, those decisions are made by the Chief Executive, and there's a lot of things that need to be considered in terms of recruitment and retention and other things. I acknowledge that. However, we need to ensure that every dollar that we ask the ratepayers to spend is used in a way that seems fair and appropriate.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, colleagues. Just want to briefly acknowledge the excellent work of staff and the auditor and her staff in really getting through the numbers here, and it's very heartening to hear that report back, although it's taken some time to get here. It is great to know that the numbers are lining up, and that's both in terms of the dollars and the emissions, although there's still some caveats around how you measure emissions, but you know, at least we're getting there in terms of working that into the reporting and accountability cycle. Really appreciate that work, because it actually kind of frees me up to think a little bit more about the kind of narrative and illustrative components of the report, which is probably where a little bit more of my interest lies. And I would say, as others have commented, over the years, these have stepped up in terms of the quality of what's there, and I think what we see in front of us today reads quite well to me, and that it's quite factual, and I think less, let's say, spin than you might see in some other annual reports around the place. I think it's quite a good and frank summary of where things are at.
with a high level of detail in it as well, which is helpful to see. And obviously, I'm very enthusiastic about getting a couple extra charts included in the summary. The reason for that is that we do spend and invest a lot of time with the community and talking to them about areas of expenditure by, whether it's libraries or transport or parks and reserves or whatever. Those charts are actually the cleanest way to actually close that loop for people that may recollect those from the consultation documents. And that's why I'm very keen that in the summary level, we actually see those as well, so the community hopefully has a better chance of connecting the dots, even if they don't follow Councillor Wood's good advice and read every single line. Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Look, I'll just summarise too. Look, thanks to the staff, thanks to Debbie and her team. Look, just one small comment around those tagged non-financial measures. I just encourage the officers to come back to some advice on us on what we're going to do with that. It's been sitting there for a little while, and I think we just need to deal with it in some manner, one way or the other. Look, a couple of things. This is a historical document, so there's just a few comments around the airport dividend. It was the majority view of council at the time that they invested that dividend back into the balance sheet and the property of the airport company. That has changed going forward, but of course we only made that decision a couple of weeks ago. So it's factually correct as it sits in the document at the moment. So look, on that note, I think we can vote. Thank you. Has passed 15 votes for, none against. Right, we'll move through to number 10 now, which is our resident survey and the results of the 2022 version of that, and I'll ask Andrew Boyle from Community Planning to come forward and speak to that. That's 357 of your papers.
Hello everybody. A lot of details in here, so I'll just highlight a few key points. The survey's done for us by an independent firm. The residents are randomly selected by using the electoral roll, so the results are robust. And those results do show a drop in satisfaction right across council services, and other councils have similar results, which means that they're likely due to a common reason, and that common reason would be COVID, the economic tough times and standard of living, just all affecting the national mood. That doesn't mean that the results are wrong. It just means that the cause for the drop in satisfaction, which is real, is outside of council's control in many ways. But despite that, there's a lot of services in here that still have over 3/4 of the people satisfied with them. And in most of the services, there is a very, very low dissatisfaction rate. If people are not satisfied, they tend to be neutral. That's my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So, Andrew, in terms of, I understand the questions are fairly generic that you ask, or the research company or whoever does it asks. Who actually selects those questions? Where do those questions come from? Do you dream them up, or does somebody come up with them?
Mostly, there are a standard set of questions that Key Research ask other councils. We add in our own around the city, satisfaction with the city, but most of the questions are common to all of the councils doing the survey, and they've been prepared by the research company.
And you said other councils. So this particular company that works for us too, some example of other councils. Who do they work? Is there a lot of them, or?
18. Okay. Most of them are district councils. There's 3 other city councils. I know MDC use these, the same company. I'm not too sure of the complete list.
Okay. All right, Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Andrew. I've just got, I think, maybe 3 questions. The first one there is just around the company surveys between 400 and 500 people, and they split that quarterly to try and sort of spread, I guess, the views. Do we have any understanding as to whether or not the results could be skewed, for example, by one particular quarter, depending on sort of the time of year or what's happening in that quarter?
The reason we get, or the company does it that way, is really to avoid it being skewed by any one quarter. If, for example, there was a bad traffic accident shortly before we surveyed everybody, then that could affect the results. Or bad weather affecting flooding, affecting council services. So by doing the survey in 4 quarters, we minimise or spread out the time in which questions are asked to avoid that.
Yeah, but we can't, I suppose what I'm trying to perhaps get to here is we can't discount the fact that a major event of some type, perhaps some response to COVID or something to do with perhaps the rates have just gone out, that may in fact actually skew people's view of the questions being asked?
Yeah, the most it would affect a quarter of the respondents.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a chance of skewing. Thank
Yes.
you. Okay. So the news is certainly not as good as we hoped. What are your thoughts just in terms of what do we do with the survey results now?
I think there's a recommendation helping us on that. But in particular, we were suggesting that they be used by ELT consistently in what they do and by the activity managers, but in particular for the development of the LTP.
Okay, thank you. And my last question really is, Palmerston North is safe. That's seemingly the only question around sort of community safety. Formally, we used to break that down into other aspects of that. So do you have any comments about how we could actually grow that into something a little bit more useful?
There's always a challenge to ask a survey that is long enough to get all of the information that we want, but that is short enough so that people don't stop answering it halfway through. And the advice we've got from the research company is that if we start adding many more questions to this survey, especially open-ended questions, we will have to start taking some out, just so that the survey doesn't get too long. You can easily imagine this if you're at home doing the survey 15, 20 minutes, you probably feel comfortable doing it 20, 25. It might be near dinner time, you might stop, you might intend to go back to do it, but you don't. So there's that real balance between covering all of the information that we want to get, but making sure that lots of people don't abandon the survey partway through. And then on top of that, we want to keep consistent questions, because in many ways the most use from the survey comes in the trends that we get over 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. We don't want to keep chopping and changing questions.
Yeah, thank you. But if I can just perhaps just go back in history sometime for the City Council, like for example, when we surveyed safety in the city, we would split that into night, day, central CBD, and perhaps residential safety perceptions. Would that be more helpful, do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure we could do something like that. It's really the open-ended questions that do take time and a bit more energy from people.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Andrew. Do we collect any demographic information beyond the basic age, gender, et cetera, to help us interpret any of the results?
So this is on my page 53 of the survey. There is a demographic profile there, gender, ethnicity, ward, age, whether they pay rates or rent, and how long they've lived in Palmerston North.
And is there any further demographic information was the question?
Sorry, other than that, no.
Okay, thank you. Are there options available to us to get more, what I would think of as more relevant comparators? There's only 2 other cities. There's a total of 3 cities in the survey. There's more cities than that in New Zealand. Is there options available to us, and what are they?
We used to do the Communitrack survey, which did have a whole lot more councils and cities in it, maybe 30 or so, but there was increasing dissatisfaction about the polling method they used, which was by telephone. So no, if we want to, our hope is that more councils will pick this up and the numbers will grow that way. I'm not sure that there's any other survey that would have hugely more councils involved, and if we went to them, we would lose, 4 years of trend data.
Probably just through Mr Mayor, there is about 3 different providers that provide this survey on behalf of councils across the country, and so when you go out to actually renew the service for a 2 or 3 year period, those companies bid for the work. So getting all councils using the exact same survey, highly unlikely.
Thank you. Thanks. Those are helpful responses. I'll just leave it there for now. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Andrew. I'm on page 405. Right. So the residents of Takaro seem more dissatisfied with their wastewater and sewage. Why do you think that is? What would be your rationale? What would be your reason for that, Andrew?
I'm not sure whether it's a ward thing or an ethnicity factor, but I don't know. I'm not aware of any infrastructure reason that would give that result. I did note that I think it was in this survey that the Takaro residents in general had a less satisfaction across quite a few different areas.
Because if you go over the page,
I'd have to check that.
Go over the page to 406, and you're looking at the roading. It's similar as well.
Yeah.
They're dissatisfied in that area as well.
Yes.
So do you think we've got a problem in that area of the city with some of these services?
I don't know. I don't have enough infrastructure knowledge to know if there's a marked difference in the infrastructure in those areas.
So to follow up on a question following up from that, could we do focus groups in these areas to follow up what these problems are?
Yes, we could.
Because, both sets of questions, there's dissatisfaction with both areas for roading and then for sewage and wastewater. Could we follow up with focus groups in these areas with some of these residents?
Yes, if that's what you wished.
Well, I'm trying to get advice from you as the officer.
Yep, if council wished to do focus groups, we could do them. We do not have the budget to do them at the moment.
Okay.
So it could be an annual budget issue. Question for you if you want to do that.
Yes, through Mr Mayor, I'll just perhaps respond to that as well, Councillor. Yes, I think that there's probably going to be a general theme coming out of the back end of this survey that we do need to do some more work which might very well include the things such as you've just mentioned, focus groups, and how it is that we engage with the community better. I think that the results that we've seen this year, and even years before that, is that there needs to be a conscious effort to kind of lift our game a little bit more.
Thank you.
I'll just ask Mike Moynihan to speak to this too.
Thank you, through the Chair. Yeah, just in response to the infrastructure question around Tarkrow, there's nothing to our knowledge of any level of service change from Tarkrow to any other ward in the city. You know, all levels of service are kind of equal. You know, there's no infrastructure failure in that part of the city, so I don't think I can answer that question.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question around our methodology here. So it states in the background of the report that 400 to 500 residents were surveyed, which means we have a 4.5% margin of error, meaning our results could be anywhere from, well, effectively up to 9% off, one way or the other. Do we have any ability to influence or request the number of people that the organisation surveys, or is that just their standard, the package they offer is they will survey 400 to 500 people and that's that?
No, we could request more if we were willing to pay more. So that seems to me about the right balance. Again, noting that if having the 400 to 500 does have a relatively higher margin of error, which is why we put weight on trends more than one single year. Yep. But yes, if you want to, similar to the focus groups, it's really a budget issue.
I'll leave the rest for comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. That's the questions done. So, councillors, we've got two resolutions here. Results of the 2022 resident survey. Council resolves that the Council note the results of the 2022 resident survey. Number 2, that Council use the results of the 2022 resident survey in its decision-making process, particularly for the development of the 2024 long-term plan. I'm quite happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We've also got another additional resolution or recommendation from Councillor Barrett. But actually, could we add that in as well? Because I think we... And number 3 from Councillor Barrett and Councillor Naylor is, in addition, is that the Chief Executive report to Council in the first half of 2023 with options to address some of those key challenges identified in the survey. So I think it's all quite self-explanatory, but I'll allow Councillor Barrett to, you want to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to. Hopefully it is fairly self-explanatory. The survey makes quite a bracing read. There's been some nice trends where things have either been stable or even heading up a bit until you get to this year. And now we have 2 out of 3 measures have dropped quite significantly. What I'd like to see is that for those key theme areas, we heard about money, trust, leadership, financial management, transport, sustainability, for those key areas where we've seen indications, I would like to see some information come back to this table with some options around how we might look to respond to those a bit sooner than just seeing things towards the long-term plan. I think it would be appropriate, given that we've seen quite a major shift, that we respond as appropriately as we can, as in as timely a manner as we can. So I'd ask you to support the 3rd resolution as well as the first 2, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Look, I'm happy to support it. I think I spoke to the CE about it, and there's sort of some agreements that something probably needs to be done sooner rather than later. I think, though, it is a point in time. Sometimes the questions are quite generic, as I was sort of going to where they've come from, who we're asking. You know, right in the middle of COVID, quite massive revaluation changes, cost of living. It's actually not surprising in some of the responses. And some of the other responses, I agree, they are quite perplexing to understand how we've got to where we've got to. So I welcome some sort of options. How do we address those challenges which may continue in the coming year? Councillor Johnson.
I do support this resolution, but I would just like to say that we need to be focused on where the significant change in our council with respect to other councils, rather than looking at a trend going down. Because if the trend across the country is every council going down in different areas, it's not actually telling us anything about what we're doing well or not so well as a council. It's giving us more a bit of a national picture. But where there are some areas, for instance, where our council deviates significantly from the average council response, those are the areas I think we really need to be focusing on. So just to pick one out for an example, cemeteries, we've got a much higher level of dissatisfaction in cemeteries than other councils. So I know it's easy to just look at like the headline sort of picture of, oh, you know, dissatisfaction, or satisfaction levels have gone down here, there and everywhere. But in fact, I think I'd support a more nuanced look at this so that we're focusing on where the satisfaction levels of our residents are significantly different for our council compared to other councils, rather than just an across-the-board look. Because I think if we're not careful, we could get carried away with changing lots of things that wouldn't have a superb impact on people's satisfaction levels. So if people are happy overall with life, they'll likely give us a good answer. When they're unhappy, and there's lots of reasons to be unhappy this year, totally understand that, then they're going to be unhappy with all aspects of life. But the nuance in this is where we're significantly different to another council in specific areas, and that, I think, is where we should be focusing this report. So, thank you.
Councillor Wood.
I was going to ask, are we speaking to all three or just this?
All three.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to make a brief comment regarding, and I've put my statistics hat on here, regarding margins of error. So I completely agree with Officer's comments in terms of the overall trends of how the majority of the city feels about the majority of things. I take no issue with a 4.5% margin of error. That's perfectly reasonable. Where I take some issue in reading too much into this is when we break it down into specific demographics. So let's say we only did survey 400 residents, and then we split the city into 5 areas, Papoea, Tākaro, the other areas that are outlined in here. That means we've got about 80 to 100 people from that particular area. That means we have a margin of error of 11 to 10% for each of those areas. So that means we've got 20 to 22% margins of error on those particular demographics. And the report states itself, you know, there are going to be larger margins of error for subsamples. So I would caution us digging too deep into, okay, well, Tākaro is appearing to be slightly more dissatisfied by one particular thing, because if we had 10 residents we surveyed that were particularly unhappy, that would have a significant sway over that data because the sample size is so much smaller for those particular subsections. And so, given the importance this report has into our decision-making and our thinking, our understanding of our community, I would sort of flag now I'd like to see next year that we do go for a larger sample size so that those subsections can give us more accurate results on those particular areas. Because to me anyway, I find it difficult to read much, if anything, into the subsection analysis because of the very, very small size of the sample sizes of those subsections. As any statistical report, you would make that analysis. So I'm very comfortable with the overall trends and the overall, you know, the quality statistically of the overall trends, but the statistical usefulness of some of these more in-depth, more area-specific trends, I think may be lacking due to the small subject size or sample size. So that's all I'd flag here today, as I wouldn't want to see us go all in on addressing something in a particular subsection based on this report without doing further sampling and research, because this report may have some quite significant margins of error in it in those subsections.
Okay, I don't need to write a reply. Councillor Barrett.
I just briefly did want to acknowledge and respond to Councillor Johnson's views around focusing on where council is an outlier And I think that there is some value in making sure that that comes into the picture. However, I wouldn't want to see that being the only lens that's put across this. I think if we've got a situation where there are, reputational indicators that are heading in the wrong direction, even if all other councils are in the same boat, we still need to be doing what we can to rebuild and do as best as we can to respond to the community there. So I realize that throws a little bit of a challenge to the Chief Executive because the wording of the resolution is reasonably generic, and it doesn't talk about just looking at outliers or just looking at critical reputational challenges, but I hope that there'll be a good inclusive report that comes back to us with some options that do address the key challenges. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We will vote on all three together. And that is passed, 15 votes for and none against. All right, thank you. Okay, we move through to number 11, which is around the lodgement of the consent application for Nature Calls wastewater treatment plant, and that's on page 471 of your papers. And I'll invite Mike up again, please, our waters manager. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, councillors and your worship. So the lodgement date for the wastewater discharge consent, as everybody knows, was the 1st of June 2022, and this was condition 23C of the existing consent. Numerous delays in the BPO phase, mainly due to COVID-19, made that date highly unlikely to be achieved. A clear and detailed work programme indicated that a date towards the end of this calendar year, 2022, was a much more realistic date to achieve. And thanks in great part to Horizons Regional Council for recognising the work programme and agreeing to a new lodgement date of the end of December 22. We recognise that if we go beyond this date, we will continue to be in breach of condition 23C. So we're aiming to submit the consent on the 19th of December. This being the last sitting council of the year, we've brought the paper to this council meeting. I mentioned in my paper earlier today that there have been an extraordinary amount of work done by a large team to get us to this point. Particularly thanks to Councillor Barrett for your role on the project reference group, which superseded the BPO steering group. And a big thanks to all you elected members as well for your continued support and guidance throughout this process. And just to quote the Mayor earlier today, the hard work starts now. So I'd like to take the paper as read, and we'd be happy to try and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. If I could just make a couple of, well, first of all, a couple of questions. So we have the application. It's all, you get the approval. It's all ready to go in the next couple of days to Horizons. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, and it has the approval or the blessing of our partners, Rangitane. Correct. Okay. You may be aware, or you may not be aware, that we received a letter today. In fact, just literally dropped into inboxes late this afternoon. I haven't had a chance to really read it, but it's from other tangata whenua down in the Horowhenua, Rangitane, Raukawa. And they are asking us to stop. Have they make some statements here, and again, I've only read it, so I'll be careful how I phrase this, but they're saying they haven't received papers or reports from the group.
Okay, I can respond to that. There is a long list of technical papers that have been received, have been sent to Takahuki, and they've been engaged on the project reference group and also on the iwi design group So we've been engaging to try and understand any issues or aspirations that the group might have. But as you say, Mr Mayor, the letter just arrived earlier today.
Okay. And Tama Takahuki, it's a group of hapu, which we have dealt with before, or we've engaged with before. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Right, okay. All right, are there any other questions of the officers? Okay, there being none, okay, thank you. All right, so we've got there around the lodgement of the consent application for wastewater treatment plant. The council resolves, the council's note, the consent application for the wastewater treatment plant discharge consent to be lodged with Horizons Regional Council under the Resource Management Act by 19th of December 2022. I look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If I could just make a comment, I just want to acknowledge the staff, especially you, Mike, and Sarah and the Wider Waters team, and all the consultants and everybody that's added to that, to Rangi Tāne and others that have been involved. It's a great deal of work. It's only the start, in my opinion. There's quite a lot of work to go going forward. I do want to acknowledge the letter that we've received. I think it's important that we do make that comment. And obviously our people will respond to that. We've been asked to respond by the 19th, so I'm sure that that is responded to, please. But look, again, yeah, well done on getting to this stage. Those that have been involved in it will know what I mean. It's been a great deal of work. I'll open it up for any other comments. There being none, we will vote. And that is passed 14 votes for with 1 abstention. All right, we now move to number 12, which is a summary report on our Palmerston Quarterly Economic Monitor. And I'll ask Stacey Bell if she wants to speak to that. I'll take it as being read.
Is that better? Yep.
That's better.
Okay, so yeah, as you were saying, Mayor Grant, I understand now that these reports are to be taken as read, but I'm happy to either provide a summary or to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, make it a quick summary. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so the most recent data for the September quarter continues to show that the diversity of the city economy is supporting economic activity. We do have record jobs and earnings growth in the city, which is favourable, and of course low unemployment and falling benefit numbers. We also have an increased labour force at the moment, with under 19-year-olds and over 60s coming into the workforce, which has been really needed. We are about to encounter some quite difficult times, with the interest rates rising as they are now forecast for the OCR, or the official cash rate, to hit 5.5% at peak next year, which will push up interest rates, or floating interest rates, now to around the 9%. So this is a problem for us. The RBNZ has made it quite clear that they are intent on pushing the economy into recession if it means bringing inflation back to control. However, the longer-term optimism still remains for the New Zealand economy, so this is a blip in time as we see it, but the next year or two is going to be quite tough for households and businesses. We are seeing the housing market as the canary in the coal mine so much, and we're seeing that softening quite strongly now, around 13.7% down median price for Palmerston North City over the year to November. There is concerns over the RBNZ over-tightening, but we yet to see that play out. My view is that potentially they are posturing and making statements to actually stop or prevent businesses from passing on those costs to consumers, which will have put downward pressure on inflation. So I think that is part of the conversation at the moment, or the rhetoric that's been put out by the Reserve Bank. So we hope that that doesn't reach the levels that they state. Myself and many other commentators don't believe that it will at this point in time, but we'll see what happens over the next few months. They are forecasting that inflation will return to between the range in early 2020 or mid-2024. So yeah, we've got some tough times, but the resilience of the city economy alongside the public and private sector structure that we have here has been a strong resilience factor for the economy over the COVID period and will continue to be so. Thank you. Any questions?
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks for your report. I see you made a note about health enrolments falling, but we know that it's hard for people to get an enrolment with a GP at the moment. So do you think that's reflecting a fall in the population in the city, or is it just an artefact related to the fact that people can't actually get enrolled with a GP?
My view is that it's not a very good indicator at the moment of population for that reason. So it has fallen by 0.3%, which is rather minimal, but as we do know across the city, you can't get enrolled with a clinic for love nor money. So it is an indicator that's been used in our population projections, but I will be arguing that point around the reliability of that indicator due to those conditions.
So is there any better indicator that we could use?
We do have school roll data that does show a softening, and that's happening here and at the New Zealand level as well. So that is also being brought into those forecasts for population. We are seeing young children. We are seeing a bit of an outflow in terms of labour to the Australian market, which was completely forecast for this period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate that. And that's our questions done. So appreciate you giving us a brief summary there. So, councillors, we've got the summary report to receive, titled Summary Report on the September Quarter 2022 Palmerston North Quarterly Economic Monitor for information. I'm happy to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I think I'll just repeat what I said at the multicultural dinner. Diverse people, diverse economy. And I think that sums up where our strength lies as we do go into some rocky times. So thank you again to the staff for that. Being no other comments, we will vote, please. That's passed, 14 votes for and none against. Right, now we move to number 13, which is the Council Work Schedule, which is on page 491 of your papers. I'm going to look to move that we receive the work schedule dated the 14th of December 2022, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote. It's passed, 14 votes for and none against. All right, we will now look to exclude the public for our part 2 part of the meeting. And for reasons of negotiations, I'm just trying to read that. I will look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any questions, comments to that? There being none, we will vote, please. That's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Right, we'll just gather a couple of minutes. You might want to stretch your legs while we just prepare the room for part 2.